and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Glenn Miller, his biography, and best hits. Born in 1904 in Iowa, Miller wasn't just another trombone player, he was a visionary. After years of hustling through dance bands in the 20s and the 30s, he finally cracked the code in 1938 with his own orchestra. And once that brass and clarinet-led reed section hit the airwaves, the Glenn Miller Orchestra took over the music scene. Now check this out. From 1939 to 1943, Miller scored more top hits than Elvis or the Beatles ever did in their prime. Songs like In the Mood, Moonlight, Serenade, Tuxedo Junction and Pennsylvania 65000 weren't just songs, they were the soundtrack of a generation. And Glenn Miller wasn't just about the hits. In 1942, right in the middle of his fame, he walked away from it all to serve his country. He joined the Army Air Force and formed a band that kept spirits high for the troops during World War II. Sadly, in December 1944, on a flight to France to entertain Allied forces, Miller's plane disappeared over the English Channel. He was only 40. But here's the thing, Glenn Miller never really left us. His recordings still sell, his orchestra still tours, and In the Mood still makes people get up and dance. Glenn Miller wasn't just swing, he was the sound of America in the 1940s. And that was some insight into Glenn Miller, his biography and best hits. More details coming up. Also coming up, some trending music news. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Glenn Miller, his life and times and best hits. During this hour, we're going to be talking about his biography. Born Alton Glenn Miller in Iowa back in 1904, Miller grew up in a small town America but had big dreams. He picked up the trombone as a teenager and never let it out of his sight. By the time most kids were thinking about college, Glenn was already chasing gigs, practicing late into the night, determined to carve out a career in music. By the 1920s, Miller was working as a sideman with some of the top names of the day, the Ben Pollock Orchestra, arranging for the Dorsey Brothers, and even contributing to Ray Noble's band. But he wasn't satisfied just blending into the brass section. Glenn Miller had an idea for a sound, something no other orchestra had. The sound came together in 1938. He tried once before to form a band, but it flopped. This time, Miller had perfected the formula. A clarinet-led reed section, gliding over the rich harmonies from the saxophones, all wrapped up in rhythms that swung hard but never lost their polish. That tight, instantly recognizable blend became known as the Miller sound. His theme, Moonlight Serenade, introduced in 1939, became his signature piece. Smooth, dreamy and romantic, it wasn't just background music, it was a mood, a feeling. To this day, you hear those opening notes and you're transported to another time. Then came In the Mood. You know it, the iconic riff, the build-up, the unstoppable swing. Released in 1939, it spent 12 weeks at number 1 on the charts. It wasn't just a dance number, it was the dance number, the anthem of the swing era. Glenn Miller didn't stop there. He brought us Chattanooga Choo Choo, featured in the 1941 win Sun Valley Serenade. That record made history. It became the first ever single certified gold, selling over 1 million copies. Suddenly, Glenn Miller wasn't just a band leader, he was a national celebrity. Other hits rolled in: Tuxedo Junction, Pennsylvania 65000, A String of Pearls, Little Brown Jug. Each one polished, precise, yet overflowing with charm. Glenn Miller wasn't about wild improvisation, he was about arrangements that were airtight, melodies that stuck, and a sound that you knew within the first few bars. By the early 1940s, the Glenn Miller Orchestra was on top of the world. They played sold-out theaters, ballrooms, even hit the Hollywood screen in films like Orchestra's Wives. Miller's orchestra wasn't just a band, it was a cultural force. But then came World War II, and here's where Glenn Miller's story takes a remarkable turn. At the peak of his fame, he walked away from it all. In 1942, Miller dissolved his civilian band and volunteered for military service. He was 38 years old, too old to be drafted but determined to serve. Commissioned as a captain in the Army Force, Miller believed music could be a weapon of morale, and he proved it. He assembled the Army Air Force Band, a massive modern ensemble that brought swing to servicemen overseas. They toured bases, broadcast over the radio, and lifted spirits in the darkest days of the war. Miller even reworked military marches with a swing feel, proving that music could march alongside the troops. But tragedy struck. On December 15, 1944, Glenn Miller boarded a small plane in England, headed to France, where he was scheduled to prepare concerts for troops in liberated Paris. The plane vanished over the English Channel and was never found. Glenn Miller was just 40 years old. His disappearance shocked the world. Here was a man at the height of his career, a national icon, and suddenly he was gone. Miller's golden years lasted barely 5 years, from 1939 to 1944, and yet in that short window, he produced a catalogue of hits that remain timeless. Moonlight Serenade, In the Mood, Chattanooga Choo Choo, A String of Pearls, Tuxedo Junction, Pennsylvania 65000, and that's the genius of Glenn Miller. He didn't set out to be the flashiest trombonist or the wildest improviser. He set out to create a sound. As he once put it, a band ought to have a sound all of its own. It ought to have a personality, and his orchestra had exactly that. Even decades later, the Glenn Miller Orchestra lives on. Successor bands still tour the world under his name, keeping the swing alive for new audiences. Movies like the Glenn Miller Story starring Jimmy Stewart introduced his music to younger generations. His records have never gone out of print. And his theme, Moonlight Serenade, is still one of the most instantly recognizable melodies of the 20th century. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Glenn Miller, his biography and best hits. Now it's time for some trending festival news. Mark those calendars. October 3rd through 5th, the Hudson Jazz Festival 2025 is taking over town with more than 20 free concerts all weekend long. That's right, 3 days, multiple venues, and some of the hottest jazz talent around, from hometown favorites to rising stars of tomorrow. We are talking sounds around town, free pop-up concerts all across Hudson. You'll hear the next generation of greats from Bard College's jazz program, students, faculty, alumni, mixing it up with those beloved local players. Catch sets at Hudson Hall, the Amtrak station, the Farmers Market, Back Bar, Park Theatre, and a dozen more cool spots. Friday night, the incredible Julius Rodrigo group lights up Hudson Hall. The New York Times calls him a prodigy. NPR calls him a torchbearer for the new jazz generation. Then the party kicks into high gear with Big Yucky at the Second Ward Foundation, fusing jazz, hip-hop, soul, and electronica into a late-night groove you can't stand still for. Saturday keeps it rolling with free daytime pop-ups and a primetime set from Katie Georgie, two-time Juno winner with a retro twist. And Sunday, get ready. Two-time Grammy nominee Alfonso Hahn and the Gotham Kings turn the caboose into a New Orleans-style street parade, and vibraphonist Joel Ross closes the whole thing at Hudson Hall with his bold, genre-bending sound. The Hudson Jazz Festival isn't just music, it's a celebration of community, culture, and the spirit of the valley. Get the full lineup, tickets, and festival passes now at hudsonhall.org. And that was some trending festival news on the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. We are going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. On this week's episode, it's about Glenn Miller, his biography and best hits. During this hour, we are going to be talking about some of his best singles of all time. First up, we've got the legendary Moonlight Serenade from 1939. Smooth clarinet, lush brass, pure romance. This one went on to become Glenn Miller's signature song, and no wonder. It's sitting pretty in the Grammy Hall of Fame. But if you wanted energy, you want to tune into In the Mood. Also from 1939, this one lit up dance floors nationwide. That driving rhythm and unforgettable brass riff made it the anthem of the swing era. Then in 1940 came Pennsylvania 65000. Fun fact, it's named after the phone number of the Hotel Pennsylvania in New York where the band played. Skip ahead to A String of Pearls in 1941, elegant, melodic, and yes, a chart topper. And of course, Tuxedo Junction, Glenn's spin on an Ernestine Hawkins tune, turning a regional hit into a national sensation. Finally, A Little Brown Jug, a playful revival from 1939 that still gets toes tapping. And that was a quick recap of what's coming up during this hour. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Glenn Miller, his biography and best hits. During this hour, we're going to be talking about some of his best singles of all time. Let's start where it all begins with Moonlight Serenade. Recorded in April of 1939 and released just a month later, this song became Glenn Miller's calling card. That smooth clarinet line, the warmth of the brass behind it, it was the very essence of romance in the swing era. When people talk about the Miller sound, this is what they mean. Precise, polished, and yet full of emotion. Audiences embrace it immediately, and critics have been praising its sophistication for decades. In 1991, the Grammy Hall of Fame made it official, honoring Moonlight Serenade as one of the greatest recordings of all time. But really, fans had known that from the first note. It wasn't just a song, it was an invitation to dance under the stars. Now, if Moonlight Serenade was Glenn Miller at his most romantic, then In the Mood was Miller at his most energetic. Also recorded in 1939, this song became the anthem of the swing movement. Originally composed in the early 30s, it took Miller's arrangement to turn it into the chart-topping sensation we know today. From the driving rhythm to those unforgettable brass riffs, In the Mood was impossible to resist. Dancers packed ballrooms coast to coast, swinging to its energy. Over the years, it's shown up in film, TV shows, commercials, cementing its place as one of the most iconic songs in American history. And it's still the one people shout off when they hear the name of Glenn Miller. From there, Miller and his band took audiences straight to New York City with Pennsylvania 65000. Inspired by the telephone number of the Hotel Pennsylvania where the orchestra often played, this 1940 hit brought a playful, almost cheeky edge to the swing sound. Listeners loved the novelty of the number itself being woven into the music, and of course, the brass section drove it home with power and flair. Featuring a standout trumpet solo by Johnny Best, the track was a commercial smash, climbing onto the Billboard Top 5 and becoming a staple on the radio. The Hotel Pennsylvania's Café Rouge became forever linked with the song, and suddenly a phone number had become part of music history. In 1941, the orchestra recorded A String of Pearls. Composed by Jerry Gray with lyrics by Eddie DeLange, this tune was all about elegance. Flowing, melodic, and beautifully arranged, it showed how Miller could balance popular appeal with genuine musical sophistication. Bobby Hackett's trumpet solo shines here, lyrical, smooth, and absolutely unforgettable. The song went on to top the Billboard's bestsellers chart and stayed in the top for weeks. Critics still call it one of Miller's most accomplished works, and it's easy to see why. Of course, Glenn Miller also had a gift for reinterpreting existing songs and making them his own. Take Tuxedo Junction for instance. Originally written by Erskine Hawkins and his band, Miller recorded it in 1940 and transformed it into a nationwide sensation. His arrangement, led by clarinet, smooth brass harmonies, and that irresistible swing rhythm, turned a regional hit into a national one. It climbed to number 7 on the charts and quickly became a staple of Miller's live performances. That's the Miller magic. He didn't just play songs, he reimagined them and made them feel like his own. And finally, let's end with something light-hearted and fun, Little Brown Jug. Now this one goes way back, originally written in 1869 by Joseph Winner. But in 1939, Miller gave it a fresh swing arrangement, and suddenly an old folk tune was back on the top of the charts. The band's brass section gave it bounce and audiences couldn't get enough. It became one of Miller's earliest hits and a crowd favorite at concerts, including at the band's legendary Carnegie Hall performance that same year. It's playful, it's catchy, and it shows another side of Miller, his ability to bring joy to a room while still maintaining that distinctive polish. 6 songs that together paint the portrait of Glenn Miller's genius. From the haunting beauty of Moonlight Serenade, to the unstoppable drive of In the Mood, to the playful spark of Little Brown Jug, Glenn Miller gave the world a sound it could dance to, dream to, and fall in love with. His music was precise yet warm, sophisticated yet accessible, and that's why it continues to resonate with audiences nearly a century later. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Glenn Miller, his biography, and best hits. Now it's time for some trendy music news. Jazz Power Initiative is about to drop Squeezing Tight on September 1st, an album full of soul, groove, and heart. But here's the catch. It also marks the final performance of legendary drummer and educator David F. Gibson. Gibson toured and recorded with Count Basie's orchestra, Duke Ellington's band, Sun Ra, Joe Williams, Clark Terry, and more. And beyond the stage, he was also a teacher who shaped the next generation at the New School and through Jazz Power Initiative. Dr. Eli Yamin, his longtime collaborator and co-founder of JPI, said it best. Dave had a beat that could shake the earth, and this album is a tribute to that, a mix of originals and classics, with heavyweights like saxophonist Zaid Nasser, bassist Elias Bailey, and rising stars like trumpeter Nicole Davis and vocalist Clover St. Hubert. Produced by Jeff Jones aka the Jedi Master, this one's stacked. Mark your calendars, September 1st it hits all the streaming platforms, and on September 12th, New York City comes together at the Eliza's Axe Center for a special release event and a salute to David F. Gibson. And that was some trendy music news on the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. We're going for a short break, we'll be right back after that. When we come back, we're going to be talking about more of Glenn Miller's best albums of all time. Stay tuned.